welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. The Russian Investigative Committee says the death toll from the Crocus City attack has risen to 137. President Vladimir Putin, in a televised address, said that 11 people have been detained, including the 4 gunmen. President Putin called the incident a barbaric terrorist attack and said, let me quote him, "All the perpetrators, organizers and those who ordered this attack will be justly and inevitably punished, whoever they are, whoever is guiding them," unquote. Russian authorities think there is a Ukrainian hand behind this horrific terrorist attack. However, the Ukrainian presidential aide has categorically denied this. On the other side, we have seen Islamic State group has claimed the responsibility for this deadly attack. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in a news conference, has said, let me quote him, "ISIS is a terrorist organization that is operating in several parts of the world, and it is a very serious threat to us all. And we encourage all countries to work with each other in order to make sure that ISIS will not have the capacity to strike again anywhere else in the world," unquote. Now, the U.S. National Security Council spokesperson has also said that the U.S. government had the information about a planned terrorist attack in Moscow, potentially targeting large gatherings. World leaders have condemned this horrific attack and offered condolences and expressions of solidarity with the government in Russia, including Pakistan's Prime Minister and the Foreign Office as well. We have seen in the recent past, the Islamic State group has staged several attacks in the region in particular, and the Afghan de facto authorities, the Afghan Taliban, had also been going after this particular group, and they have also carried out operations specifically targeting this group. What else is required from the de facto authorities in Afghanistan also? And also, as we talk about the statement given by the United Nations Secretary General, how important and crucial are the collective efforts on the part of the international community to deal with this particular threat? To discuss all this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Sarfraz Rana. He's foreign policy expert and security analyst. Mr. Rana, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Qamar. He's foreign affairs expert. Dr. Cheema, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Rana. Now, the Russian authorities think there is a Ukrainian hand behind this horrific incident. However, on the other side, we have seen that ISIS has claimed the responsibility for this attack. Also, with the US administration quite confident that it was ISIS, there is no reason to doubt that ISIS remains to be behind this. Your understanding?
Given the geopolitical situation in the Eastern Europe and especially, in the backdrop of the Ukraine crisis, so the security situation is quite complex, and it is, very difficult to understand the security situation. Of course, now we see the two perspectives are coming from the two sides. For example, one perspective says that, which is contradicted to the other side. So that situation is quite complicated, and it's very difficult for for us to understand. I have heard that the Russia was basically of the view, the Russian officials were of the view that it was basically in close collaboration with the Ukrainian authority, probably that Islamic State has been working in close collaboration with the Russian authority. So whatever is the background, but of course attack on Russia is basically provides a pretext that the situation is getting worse in the region, right, in the Eurasian region, in Europe and Asia alike. Why? Because of the Afghanistan situation, and Afghanistan, if you see that it is it is now increasingly becoming an incubation center for all the splinter groups and all the terrorist organizations, and they take all the ideological inspirations from Afghanistan. So yeah, that's alarming. The situation is alarming.
Right. Dr. Cheema, what's your understanding? We see the Russian authorities consider the Ukrainian hand behind this horrific attack. This has been categorically denied by the Ukrainian presidential aide. On the other side, we saw the U.S. authorities think that there is clearly the ISIS hand behind this, and ISIS also claiming the responsibility. What do you understand? What sense do you make out of this whole scenario as far as the responsibility of this horrific attack is concerned, and ascertaining for a fact that who is actually behind it?
Well, I think this is not the first time that the IS has attacked Russia. Before that, back in 2022, the Russian embassy in Kabul was attacked. So this is one thing. But looking at the pretext that why they attacked Russia, there is, I think, one simple question that we need to know, that the Islamic State, which is having a very extreme definition of having an Islamic state, they believe that Russia's interference in Chechnya and in Afghanistan is one of the region where they have been interfering in Afghanistan and in Chechnya in the Muslim majority area. So this is one of the reason they believe that the attack on Russia is it is the logic which basically they give.
Right, Dr. Kamachima. Now, why do we have a difference of an understanding regarding the who actually carried out this particular attack, with differing views coming from two sides? The U.S. authorities also having no doubt that it is the ISIS which is behind this attack, but on the other side, we see Russians think that it is the Ukrainian hand behind it.
Well, I think in my understanding, the Russians do believe that if they believe blame ISIS, then it's hard to find the target. But if they blame Ukraine, the target is there. They have already waged a war. So, in my understanding, they think that if the ISISK is the target, then they will have to attack Afghanistan, maybe, or they will have to look into the Central Asian countries that from where these people have come, because we also heard that the Turkey, these people moved from Turkey to there, and they are from somewhere from Central Asia, I think Tajikistan. So the question is that in case of ISISK, the target is difficult to find, but in case of Ukraine, it's the direction is there, and already that gives legitimization to President Putin to target the Ukraine as a country, and then blame. I think that is the clear case that why Russia and the America differ.
Right, Dr. Cheema, now the investigations are underway post this particular horrific incident. The Russian authorities are, of course, busy in ascertaining for a fact that whether the Ukrainian hand is actually behind this. So if they reach to this particular conclusion that, in fact, it was a Ukrainian hand which was involved in this particular attack, we already know there is a special military operation on the part of Russia underway in Ukraine. So what sort of repercussions do you foresee as far as this particular already burning issue, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, is concerned?
Well, I think that will lead to an indiscriminate bombing in Ukraine, one thing. Secondly, the offensive against Ukraine will be more aggressive. Thirdly, this will give a sort of a more legitimization to President Putin to act and to be aggressive against Russia, against Ukraine. The fourth, then I think if there was any dot that would have connected, or there was any discussion for stopping the war, or for any kind of a ceasefire, that discussion obviously will not be at place at the moment. Fifth important point here is also that the President Putin has just won an election, although there are question marks on the election, but still he got the legitimacy on that front. So I think it will be very challenging for the Ukraine, but at the same time, this is very challenging for the Europe as well, because it means the war is not ending. It means they will have to invest more on defense. It means they are more insecure. It also means that every European country will be paying more money to the NATO, as the Americans are suggesting and asking the NATO members to pay 2% of the GDP. So it means that the entire, the securitization of the entire Europe will increase. The more funds will go, and it will create more chaos. And it also means that whatever the energy requirements were being fulfilled by Russia, there will be a question mark on that, as the Americans and many European countries are saying that the world should not get oil supplies from Russia. So further, those oil supplies will be either curtailed, stopped, or they will be rerouted renegotiation on that supply. So it is going to, the region is going to a new chaos, particularly the Ukraine, and it seems that there is no one which can cool down the situation.
Right. Let me take this, Dr. Cheema, let me take this point to Mr. Rana also. Mr. Rana, what are going to be the repercussions if the Russian authorities reach to the conclusion that it was in fact the Ukrainian side which was behind this attack?
I think the point which already had been put forward by Dr. Cheema, that of course they are going to increase the amount of attacks on Ukrainian part, and of course President Putin has got the legitimacy, and legitimacy in a way that now President Putin will be more hard, and his approach will be more harder towards Ukraine, right? And of course the election thing, of course March 18th was the presidential election in which President Putin got the overwhelming majority victory in Russia. Right, so of course there had been talks going on, therefore so now President Putin somehow got a point to distract and deviate the conversation from that side to another side right now. So why? Because emotions and many things are involved now. So of course somehow President Putin is he has gained a point to make a more harder offensive on Ukraine.
Right, once proven. That it was Ukrainian hand.
It is Ukrainian, yes.
So let's talk about the timing of it, as he got the overwhelming victory in this presidential election on 18th of March. Now, what's the motive? Let's segregate the two sides. If the Ukrainian side is found behind this particular attack, what motive do you think could be as far as their intention is concerned? And if they are not proven to be behind this, and let's talk about the ISIS. If it is confirmed that ISIS was behind this particular attack, what motive potentially they could have from this particular attack?
Well, there are two scenarios, like hypothetically speaking, if we believe that Ukraine was involved, attacking Russia. So of course, Ukraine is basically trying to prove that we are effectively basically resisting against the Russian aggression, Russian military operation, special military operation in Ukraine, right? And if the situation is otherwise, for example, Islamic State has attacked, which it claims itself, right? So of course, Islamic State is basically trying to prove that now they are expanding even into the heart of Europe, and they are launching attacks effectively on Russia, and also they already have found some safe spaces in Afghanistan, in Syria, Iraq. So I mean, they are just trying to prove their existence, that we are basically now getting back to business with more effective power, and so on and so forth. So these are the two objectives on Ukrainian side, and also on the Islamic State side. Possibly.
Right. Dr. Cheema, what's your understanding, if we segregate, what could be the motive if it is being carried out by the Ukrainian side? What could be their intention? What could be their larger interest after doing this? Or if the ISIS is found involved and there is a confirmation on the part of the Russian authorities also that it was actually ISIS which was involved in this particular attack, what could have been the motive of the ISIS group, especially targeting within Russia?
Well, I think, for one point, I don't believe that the Ukraine will use the ISIS, or any Western player will use ISIS against Russia, because everybody is fighting against the non-state actors. That is one thing. The second thing is about that we have seen that the Islamic State group has already targeted Russia for the several reasons. Remember, they have targeted Iran, they have targeted even in Afghanistan, in Russia. So they have a different understanding. And if you just look at that, where the ISISK is operating, they're operating everywhere in the region, in Pakistan, in India, in Afghanistan, even in Europe. The people have been caught from across the world. So they have global footprints. But looking that the Russians, as I mentioned, I think about Russia, their intervention in Afghanistan and Chechnya is considered as one of the major reasons that the Russians have been intervening, and they have these are these Muslim grievances, the ISISK so-called this version have. In 2022, there was a suicide attack at the Russian embassy in Kabul. So it's purely seems very, very very motivated from the ISISK as to establish its footprint, knowing, for instance, one of the reason I believe that they're expanding the footprint and why Afghan Taliban even are hosting the TTP, because they believe that the Afghan Taliban do believe that they may have to fight sometime later against the ISISK, so they should hold these militant groups in their control. So ISISK is everywhere in the region, in the Central Asia, in Afghanistan, in Russia, in this part. And then if you go on in the Middle East, they have a huge presence in Iraq and Syria. So they have good global footprints, and then they have the lone wolf who are operating in Europe and America. So calling that maybe some country will be using against another country, I think this is an overstatement in this context.
Regarding ISIS having a stronghold within Afghanistan, we've been seeing in the recent past that the Afghan authorities, the de facto authorities over there, have been going after this particular group. They've been the major rivals. They've been actually trying to hunt down with many operations. The Afghan Taliban claim that they have carried out in order to eliminate the big figures of the ISIS Khorasan. So, do you think the Afghan authorities have done enough in order to curtail the threat of ISIS emanating from the Afghan soil? If not, what else is actually required from them in the future on this particular front?
I believe that the Afghan Taliban believe that they should not get into an unnecessary war. That is to fight with the ISISK. So, ISISK as a hardcore, militant faction, which has come from the Islamic State from Syria. So, what I think the Taliban believe that if they get in engaged or they get into any conflict with the ISIS, then it will be difficult for them to run the state. They are new in power. As he mentioned, they don't want to lose their friendly militant groups like TTP, because at the later stage they may have to fight with this ISISK threat. So I think the Afghan Taliban are not fighting with them, and that's why we have seen that at many places they have been attacking Afghanistan. And at the same time, the Afghan Taliban do believe that they need to save Afghan people from the ideology of the ISISK. So that is why whenever the Americans or any Western power asking Afghan Taliban that we should have a collaboration or we should engage together to fight against ISK, nobody from Afghanistan wants to engage the Western world. Otherwise, the ISISK will have a justification for attacks against the Afghan Taliban. So far, the Afghan Taliban are trying to save themselves from any kind of a wrath that could be unleashed by the ISISK. But in reality, today, tomorrow, they will have to manage the ISK, or they have to root out, and they need to collaborate with the regional powers like Pakistan and Iran. And for that matter, I think a regional approach is required, and a more robust dialogue among the regional players is needed. And for this matter, Afghan Taliban cannot deal them single-handedly, and they should not wait for the time when ISISK expands its footprints within Afghanistan.
Right, Dr. Cheema, so what are the options from here onwards for the Russian authorities, vis-a-vis specifically the IS Khorasan?
Well, I think here the important thing is that rather blaming Ukraine or rather blaming the Western powers, all what Russia should do is they should have a coalition. For example, there are multilateral forums like SCO, like BRICS, where such kind of issues like terrorism have already been addressed and spoken. I think a more strong cooperation is required in dealing with ISISK. It's no more a threat which is for any particular country. It's for the entire region and the globe. And for that matter, dealing with the ISISK should be a collective effort of all the countries. One thing. The secondly, I think the Russians need to expand their dialogue, bilateral dialogue with all the countries in the region on this ISISK. And I think the Russians also need to pressurize Afghanistan as well, that they should root out all kind of hideouts of the ISISK within Afghanistan. And for that, they must not be passive, or they must not be so they must not let the ISISK to expand the ideology within the Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a fertile land for any kind of a militant group which are operating in the region. So a pressure from Moscow on Kabul is necessary in case the Russians the Moscow really wants to
Right.
root out ISIS-K and save itself from its threat.
Right, Dr. Cheema, one last quick question regarding as to, you already mentioned what could be the strategies or the measures that could be employed by the Russian authorities in order to pressurize the Afghan Taliban in order to dismantle the safe havens of the ISK on the Afghan soil. We've seen Moscow's engagement on this particular front also, already those concerns being raised, particularly when we talk about the recently held Moscow format meeting also.
In my regional approach, China needs to be more proactive in this. We have seen that China has come up with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a good project to connect the entire region. And I think China is a great power, and they also need to take a responsibility of some of the events which are going, and they need to play a proactive rather letting the extra regional powers to be in the region and to tell us what to do and what not to do. In my understanding, China, Russia, and other regional countries, all the countries in the region, even India, they all need to play a role in rooting out ISISK. I think that could be the only way. A dialogue within the region is required for that matter, and we have to ask and we have to press Afghanistan that as they promised in the Doha agreement that the Afghan territory will not be used against the US. I think they need to reassure all the countries in the region that the Afghan territory will not be used against Pakistan, Iran, or even Russia or Central Asian countries.
Writer Dr. Qamar, foreign affairs expert, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Rana, now talking about those safe havens that IS Khorasan does have in Afghanistan. In the recent past, we have also seen the Afghan authorities, the de facto authorities over there, had been carrying out operations, claiming that they were bigger operations, eliminating some of the top figures associated with the IS Khorasan. What else is required from them on that particular front as far as curtailing and dismantling the IS safe havens over there is concerned?
Academically speaking, we need to understand that, there is a regional security complex theory provided by Barry Buzan that says that, there are certain regions which basically are the security complex. They basically provides the security to the rest of the region. And a group of states which are located in the proximity of those areas or that region, right? Their security, primary security is basically sufficiently linked together that their national security cannot be seen in isolation. So their national securities are closely linked together. So here, I mean, first of all, as Dr. Cheema has mentioned, that we need to remind all the promises and pledges which are made at the Doha agreement, to Taliban government, that there are certain promises and there are certain pledges which you have to honor and which you have to respect. Number one. Number two, that they talk too high about the Sharia, and the Sharia says to respect the laws and the agreements which you have made. There are many clauses and sections of the Doha agreement. So one of the important thing is that Afghan Taliban or the Afghan regime, Taliban regime, will not allow their soil, for any kind of terrorist activities or terrorist or militant organizations to freely operate.
Right,
Number two.
already Dr. Cheema mentioned one point that the Afghan Taliban remain to be fearful of the threat of IS Khorasan also, and they don't want to go all the way against that particular group, and that might be opening up a new front for them as far as their action against ISIS is concerned. In that particular regard, if the international help to build up their capacity in order to deal with that threat comes, do you think the Afghan Taliban would be better able to tackle this?
I think this statement that Afghan government is a bit fearful dealing with the Islamic State, that is bit overestimation. Why? Because they fear no one. They do not fear TTP, they do not fear even Pakistan, they do not even fear China, they fear no one. Yes, that is a matter of fact. Why they have fought 21 years of war against United States of America, right? So they have they boost their claim that we have defeated this and that, and we are the graveyard of this and that. So they are just afraid of those ragtag forces of Islamic State. That is not acceptable, and I don't buy this argument, right? So they are not fearful, but they are sympathizing. Why? Because ideologically they are cousin. they are somehow collaborating at different levels, with TTP, Islamic State, and so on and so forth. As far as the regional approach is concerned, yes, I totally agree with you that there must be a coherent regional approach. Why? Because this is a common threat. You see, the other day there was an attack on Gwadar. There is now attack in Moscow. There was attack in Iran. There was attack in China. So entire region. Why? Because Afghanistan is basically a security complex. If there is an instability in Afghanistan, the region, the entire region will face the trickle down effect. Yes. So there must be a coherent and consistent regional approach. And on Pakistan side, Pakistan should now come out of this do and undo approach. Undo approach.
Let's talk about this coherent and consistent approach. Could you shed a little bit of light on this particular, what sort of an approach, what broader contours do you recommend in that particular approach should be towards the Afghan Taliban?
Jawad, there is already a mechanism over there, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, 3 evils to be fought, and 3 evils are basically terrorism, extremism, and separatism, right? So these 3 evils are the collective threat to the national security of all the regional countries, including Russia. Now you see what happened in Russia, China, Pakistan, and also, one of the signature project of President Xi cannot be successful if there is a problem and tension in this region, and especially if there is an instability in Afghanistan. Instability in Afghanistan, that means the entire region will face the trickle-down effect everywhere in Pakistan, China. So BRI will become a remote, which is a great project, which is, you can say that it is a signification of progress and prosperity and so many things.
Well, okay, right? That is on the front of the threat perception. Now, how to deal with that? What measures could be employed in that particular regard in order to have that coherent and consistent regional approach towards the Afghan Taliban? We've seen in the recent past also multiple attacks carried on in Pakistan from Afghan soil with the involvement of Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and its affiliates. Pakistani authorities very patiently had been trying to convey to the de facto authorities that this was your obligation internationally that you made in the Doha Peace Agreement. Despite that fact, firstly, there had been denial on the part of the Afghan authorities. Then they said that it is Pakistan's own problem to deal with. We don't have anything to do with that. So if they are doing that, following that approach with Pakistan, after Pakistan have done so much for them, what about the other countries?
Number one, to begin with, the problem must be securitized, number one. Number two, the problem must be prioritized. Number three, SCO, BRICS, all the platform, for example, RAD platform, right, must be, proactively take part dealing with this challenge, right? Because platform is already there, so you will not spend so much your energies into creating new platforms. Why? Because platform is there, so your transactional cost in cooperating with each other will be reduced. Number four, all the regional countries, why Pakistan have the massive expertise in the global war on terror, right? And number five, Pakistan has successfully conducted an airstrike, very precise, very comprehensive, right there in Afghanistan, right? So this can be dealt this way. Yes, if you do not take the major powers into confidence. Why? Because Pakistan alone cannot fight this menace alone. Why? Because the threat is bigger, threat is larger. So all the countries have to sit together, including China. Yes, China and Russia both have to take the lead if they are serious to deal with this issue. Yes.
Right. We are honored to have been joined by another participant on Skype, Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, Senior Analyst. General Masood, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. What's your understanding when we get the differing understanding of the two sides as far as the US authorities are concerned and the Russian authorities are concerned? Russians think that Ukrainian hand is behind this horrific attack in Cross's City. And when we talk about the US authorities, they say that there is no reason to doubt that it was ISIS that actually carried out this particular attack. Why? Firstly, why that particular difference of understanding about who carried out this attack? And when we talk about the ISIS claiming the responsibility, what's your understanding? What was the motive if ISIS actually carried out it within Russia?
Well, I think it is quite possible that ISIS took advantage of Ukraine and then used Ukraine soil to launch this attack. It is also possible that they did it in collision with them, or and they allowed them the space to operate against Russia. So I think there are several possibilities. It's very difficult to sort of say, but the thing is that it is the ISK which has been responsible for this whole incident. So irrespective of from where they launched or who really financed them, etc., these are also very important. But I think the fact remains that this is their enemy at the moment, and Russia will have to deal with it because the Ukraine war has triggered off these forces, which have become very potent and will continue to sort of attack Russia wherever it is vulnerable and also create very serious problems for Russia. And obviously, it suits countries like Ukraine. It suits countries of the Western world, especially the U.S., which thinks that Russia has not been fair, and obviously it has to the Ukrainian people. So it needs to be punished. And but the thing is that it's the pure civilians and the ordinary citizens which become the target of these incidents, who have nothing to do either with policy making or any of these, global conflicts.
Right. General Masood, when you talk about the timing, what's your understanding regarding the timing? As we know, there's been presidential election in Russia recently with President Vladimir Putin getting re-elected for the next term also. So just after a few days of that, this particular attack happens. How do you correlate the timings of both the happenings?
I think this is a very important question. Actually, what the timing reflects that they want to show that Russia today under Putin is very weak, and Putin has trusted himself over the Russian people. He does not command their support, because if he would command their support, I don't think they would have been in a position to launch such a serious attack, because then I think these people would have been exposed and the people would not have given them the space to make such a major operation. So I think that these two things are also interlinked, because today the people of Russia have a certain level of despondency. They don't see the future because the elections that were conducted in Russia were not fair, and no other party or no other person was allowed to elect another candidate. I mean, there was no alternative candidate, and the way that Putin went about and reinstated himself shows that conditions in Russia are very problematic, and such like incidents will continue, and those who are opposed to Russia or have genuine reasons to oppose Russia will fully exploit them. And the other aspect is, I think, that the Chinese, there is not much response from the Chinese about this incident, in the sense that obviously they must have condemned and all, but it is not very visible to the open world as to what exactly is the Chinese response, and do they think that it will have repercussions for in their own country also.
Right, Jawad. So there has been a response from the Chinese side, with Chinese President Xi Jinping strongly condemning the attack and sent his condolences, and also stressed that China opposes all forms of terrorism, strongly condemns the terrorist attack, and firmly supports the Russian government's efforts to safeguard its national security and stability. Now, since the ISK has particularly claimed this particular horrific attack, we know it has also carried out attacks in the recent past in the region. Also, its threat emanating clearly from the Afghan soil. We've also seen the Afghan authorities have claimed to have gone after this particular group in Afghanistan. What are the expectations from here onwards as far as the Afghan Taliban's responsibility as per their international commitment is concerned?
Well, I think Taliban will go all out to sort of counter the ISA wherever possible, and because they do not like Afghanistan to have any problems, and obviously they will make sure that their power or their attacks will not materialize, and they will heighten their security and so on. There is no doubt about it. But the point is that Afghanistan today is in a very serious situation. I mean, there is the whole country is under such tight control and that it doesn't give an impression that things will move in Afghanistan the way that they should in a normal country. So I think this additional security threat further adds to the problems of Afghanistan.
Right. So what about the collective efforts on the part of the regional countries as far as making the Afghan Taliban to go decisively against this particular group?
You see, there is to an extent that the neighboring countries can influence Afghanistan. Actually, Afghanistan is very sensitive to other countries interfering in their affairs. But at the same time, I think the type of regime that is there in Afghanistan, it becomes very difficult for the people there. Actually, it is really the people, if they are satisfied, if their economy is good, if they have a voice, things will be very different. Groups like ISK and all cannot survive in an environment like that. But when you have such a tight control and you are more or less internationally isolated and you have made life fairly miserable, especially the women, although I don't think that has really a bearing on the question that you have asked. But what I'm trying to say is that it is in the interest of Afghanistan, it is in the interest of people of Afghanistan to turn Afghanistan into a normal state. And so I think this is a huge challenge for Afghanistan, and it should not feel insecure in turning Afghanistan into a normal state. And that's the biggest challenge. And if they keep Afghanistan in the present state, their economy will not really develop to the extent that it has the potential. And other countries will also have serious reservations in trying to sort of develop relations with them.
Right. Jawad Masood, one last question as far as the regional countries is concerned and the understanding that should be developing among the ranks of the Afghan Taliban. You've already shed light on that. As far as the role and the responsibility of the United States of America is concerned, vis-a-vis the threat the ISK poses to the region, what do you suggest? What should be the role that should be ideally played by the U.S. at this particular point in history?
The first thing is that the U.S. is already involved in Afghanistan in the sense that it has heightened its intelligence and has always been very careful because it knows that Afghanistan can be, a place where there can be militant elements, which could not only harm the region, but could also, their harm could spread even up to the United States. That what happened, like, when Osama bin Laden operating in Afghanistan really launched such a major attack in the U.S. So I think the U.S. and of course even European countries are very much aware of, and keep sort of a watch on the events unfolding or happening in Afghanistan.
Right. Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, senior analyst, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Rana, now we've already talked about the regional approach. Now, what's the ideal role that is expected from the U.S. Joining hands with the major regional powers here to deal with the threat of ISK?
I think the ideal, as you said, approach must look like that United States of America should put aside its narrow national interest of containing China, at least when it comes to dealing with the greater menace, greater threat, which is terrorism, of course. Why? Because US also has a history of suffering of September 11 attacks, and I believe that US would never want those horrific events be repeating again in the history. So therefore, as I said, that US should put aside the narrow national interest containing China, should join hand with all the regional major powers, including Iran, India, and Pakistan. Why? because Pakistan is key. Pakistan has been key in global war on terror with the United States of America, and Pakistan has those required expertise of fighting against these. And Pakistan definitely has proven once again that, you know, through that power projection recently, you know, Pakistan Air Force had made those precise attacks, you know, on those terrorist outlets within Afghanistan. So yes, I mean, that comprehensive approach, joining hands with the regional powers, so that is the ideal situation to engage in this process.
Well, I've seen in the past also, before the international troops withdrew from Afghanistan, there had been collaboration, although the US and there are substantiated reports which are available everywhere, that although the US was fighting against the Afghan Taliban, there was collaboration on the other side also between the US and Afghan Taliban in order to deal with the threat that was from the ISK. So do you think that particular collaboration could be redesigned and more regional countries can come into that particular ambit also?
Yes, why not? You know, we need to see that, you know, there are areas where they compete. You know, there are areas where they can cooperate. For example, if China and US are not cooperating with each other, they cannot overcome the environmental challenge. So similarly, you know, if US and China are not cooperating along with Russia on this issue, so of course they cannot contain the terrorism. I mean, one country alone cannot deal with the terrorism alone. So here, you know, again the comprehensive and collective approach is required by putting aside all the narrow national interest. Okay, they, you know, make a distinction between two sides. For example, there is a side where they can compete, and there is a side where they ought to cooperate, and terrorism is one of them.
Right. Lastly, what are the options for Russians as the nation, as the state, for the Russian authorities? What sort of a track record does Russian authorities do have in dealing with the people who are caught in such incidents?
I mean, of course, you know, Russia has the might and Russia has the will. I mean, and definitely, you know, in the past we had seen that, you know, there had been certain problems and tensions in the regions of Dagestan and in the regions of Chechnya, and Russia had dealt with those threats, I mean, quite really effectively. So in this case as well, I mean, Russia has a really impressive past record dealing with those people, and this time also, I mean, if there is a case that, you know, Islamic State was involved, so, you know, Russian approach and Russian footprint in the region, in South Asia and also in the Middle East has been growing, and, you know, given the impressive record of Russia and Syria, I mean, the way, you know, they have stabilized the government of Bashar al-Assad against these people, so of course, you know, Russia can prove to be a very effective
Mr.
partner and
Sarfraz,
stakeholder
Ahmad,
and
Rana,
actor
foreign
as well.
policy expert and security analyst, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.